Okay, right. So, Caroline Marsh, Melissa briefly introduced me at the beginning. I'm the Director of Behavioural Science and Research for Honeycomb Works. So most of the work I do is in organisations. So I am either taking research that exists and looking at how to translate and apply that in organisations, or I'm looking at gaps where we find something that hasn't got much research on, and so doing the work to understand it better, or I'm actually in organizations trying to understand at a deeper level what's going on, either because they have a problem, they think they might have a problem, or just because. So Evelyn talked a lot about being an ally, especially as an individual, and what to do and what you need to do. And I'm going to talk about it in a slightly more organizational setting. So I'm going to talk about largely the kind of mistakes and the problems I see, because when we go into organizations and we talk to them about D&I and diversity and inclusion and their agenda and whatever it is they want to achieve, what we often find is no one thinks about what could we do wrong. They think about all the amazing things they're going to do, but they don't think about what the negative implications of those could be. And I don't want to scare anyone off from doing anything. It's brilliant that you are. I love that it's such a big conversation at the moment, but we have to be really careful, because what happens is you make a mistake, and often, especially if you're in a larger organization or where you're having to fight in order to actually do something differently, when it goes wrong and you're actually making the situation worse or it falls flat, you then lose the power to keep going. So I wanted to talk about some of the things we see on a regular basis where things aren't going so well, or the mistakes people are making on a regular basis, and what to do instead. It's not going to be all negative, don't worry. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit, especially off the back of what Evelyn was talking about. So often when we're talking to people, they'll say, but I can't talk to this. I don't have any power in this situation. And it might be that it's because they're not in HR or something like that. It might be because they're not in a management or leadership position, or actually, often it is that they're in a management or leadership position, but maybe they are a straight white man and they feel like they can't talk about this issue. This isn't their issue to talk about. As Evelyn was talking about before, they're actually the best person to deal with this issue. They are the best person to step forward. They are the person most likely to be listened to in most rooms. They have the most power. Sorry, those of you in the room who fit that criteria. But that doesn't mean the rest of us don't have power. So in a different situation, as Evelyn was saying, I can step forward and call out racism, and I'm more likely to be listened. So this is all about understanding the power that you do have in any different situation. And in particular, what I wanted to reference is role modeling, because we talked about doing this on a one-on-one basis or in a small group. But when you're in an organization, it isn't just about the person that you are being an ally for and defending in front of other people or standing up for in front of other people. It is about everybody who sees that. The actions go so much further than that small group. When you actually step forward and act like an ally, use the power and privilege you have, you're demonstrating to other people that it is okay to do this. What's quite interesting, and I find this hilarious, is if you look at research around paternity and whether or not men take paternity leave, flexible working in particular, what you find is a lot of men, the majority of men, will say, yes, I want to. When I have a child, I would like to take paternity leave. I would like to work flexibly. But when it comes to it, most of them don't. And what the research indicates is that a big reason for this is that most men believe that all the other men will look negatively at them if they do that. But the trouble is everyone else is feeling like that too. So if just one or two people step forward and go, you know what, this is the right thing for me, I'm going to do this, then it sets it up for everybody else to do it too. It completely normalizes it. So being a role model, especially if you're in management or leadership, but not just, is so important. So first thing to talk about or to say is recognize when you have power. Recognize the room you're in, the situation you're in. Look around you, especially when you're in an organization, and the effects are so far-reaching, and recognize what you have and stand up and elevate for other people. So this is a really big one for me, and I probably could talk for about half an hour just on this. So what I mean, does anyone know what I mean by outgroups? No, okay. Apart from Evelyn, it's completely cheating. So what we mean in this context is the people on the outside. The in-group is those people with the power in any given situation. They're the people on the inside, and the outgroups are those around them. And typically, not always, typically in an organizational setting, your in-group is your straight white men, and your outgroups are everyone else. Now, I just had a conversation earlier with somebody, I don't know where they are, who was saying that in their organization, it's actually the flip. But that is definitely rare. So what do we mean by fixing people in the outgroups? So I often go into organizations and they'll say, no, we've got it sorted. We're working on diversity and inclusion. We've got all these amazing initiatives. We're running this program. We're running this program for BAME employees. We're running this program for women. I'll say, okay, great. Tell me all about it. I want to hear all about it. How are you measuring it? Oh, we're not measuring it. Okay, great. We'll come back to that later. What are you teaching people? What are you doing with people? Oh, we're teaching them how to be really strong negotiators, and we're teaching them how to be really articulate and really confident and really assertive. And I'll say, so you're teaching them to be stereotypically white men. Okay, that sounds like a good plan. So there is something called the ideal worker model. So basically most organizations are set up for this ideal worker. And I'm guessing you can all picture what the ideal worker is like. So 9 to 5, always in the office, probably much longer than 9 to 5 as well. This person, this ideal person, is confident, articulate. Basically, I think we're talking about Harvey Specter. I think that's what most organizations are trying to turn everybody into. Sorry if no one got that reference. Basically, it's your archetypal, very confident, probably quite arrogant man who stands up, you know, in their good suit. They're always in the office. They have no life outside of the office. And that's who we're trying to turn everyone into. I'm not sure that's a great idea. What's interesting here, the irony is the research indicates that the skills, the habits, the behaviors that are most valued in organizations, most valued by employees, most valued by customers, and that's a big one, because a lot of organizations will argue, okay, it might be good internally, but our customers won't like it, are all related to empathy and emotional intelligence, which are stereotypically feminine traits. Now, obviously stereotypically, but they get pushed under. So what we're trying to do is fix all the outgroups to be more like a stereotype that is no longer fit for purpose. So it doesn't work on multiple levels. It also doesn't work because, as Evelyn was saying, it means that we are putting all of this pressure on these groups that already have a huge amount going on. They're already hugely aware of what's going on around them in any given room. They're aware of being the only woman, the only person of color, the only disabled person, of how everybody is treating them. So on top of that, we are pushing them on lots of courses to fix them. So I was talking to someone last week, a good friend, and they were quite senior in the civil service. And they were talking about how they are considered high potential and that this is wonderful. And they'd been put on a 2-day negotiating course, which in this case is actually relevant to their job. And the following week, they were on a 3-day Women in Leadership course that they had to be back on in 3 weeks' time. And it was putting so much pressure on them that they were going to have to work all of the weekend, largely because they were a woman. So they got to go on a Women in Leadership course. And she was talking about how amazing this was, but how actually she felt like she was being put under additional pressure that her male peers were not. So for all sorts of reasons, we cannot keep fixing the outgroups. So what do? Especially if you are in a business. So if you're in HR, leadership, management, think about the programs that you are running. Think about the initiatives you are running. If you are not in any of those groups, pay attention. Can you call out, step forward, be an ally and say, okay, that is great, but is it the right thing to do? Now, to be clear, I am not against any of these skill sets. I am not against running development programs for outgroups. Often they are overlooked from a development perspective, so I'm definitely not against that. but you do have to think about what you are including in them, why you are running them, what is the content. If you're running networks, which again, I'm a big fan of, they provide a safe space for people who often maybe don't get to feel safe at work. But think about why you are doing it. Are you trying to fix people? Are you trying to turn them into something? Or are you trying to give them the skills they need? But more importantly, far more importantly, think about what else you are doing. So what is happening for everybody else? So the other thing we see quite a lot is that they run a program like this for all of their women, and it goes brilliantly, and they're actually successful in changing behavior, which is really hard to do. And then all of those women or all of those individuals from different ethnicities or whoever it is, they go back into the business and they're changed and they feel different. And nothing else has changed. The systemic issues around them, I do not know what's going on here. The systemic issues have not changed. Nothing else has changed. So either they're coming up against a brick wall, they've changed, nothing else has, and so they start backpedaling, they start changing their behavior back, or they just become kind of disengaged and their productivity goes down and it affects their career, or they just exit. You've just lost them. You've developed them and then you've lost them. So, in conclusion, when you're thinking about what you're going to do in an organization, and this, I have to say, this applies to anybody else as well. So, tell a couple of stories. Melissa and I go to a lot of diversity and inclusion events, and it is really worrying to me the number of times I have heard, and I have to say it's typically a woman, stand up and say, you know what, this is all great and good, but we all have to take responsibility for our own careers. No one else is going to do it for you. Like, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, that's important. We all need to take responsibility. But it's again pushing that pressure back onto those individuals who are already feeling it to say, no, actually, this is all on you. I did it. I did it on my own. Okay, great, good for you. Just be mindful of what you're saying, who you're saying it to, and think about those individuals who maybe already have a lot heaped on them, and how, as Evelyn was saying, you can step up and take some of that off them, but also pass it to other people. So focusing only on categories of people. So what I see a lot in organizations is they talk about diversity, and they talk about quotas or targets, or they talk about pipeline into the business and getting the right numbers of people from different groups. And that's all great and good, but it's not going to fix anything. Or not on its own. What really matters is the environment they're coming into. So we were working with an organization last year, and a tech organization, and they were really proud of a load of work they'd done to bring lots of different people in at their graduate levels, because they were only hiring computer science graduates from Oxford and Cambridge, who are typically white and male. So they did all this work to bring in loads of different people, and 6 months later, they all left, all of them. And all of them. And it wasn't because it was a really toxic culture. It wasn't because it was an awful place to work. It was just they didn't really feel like they belonged there, because all the guys went to the pub on a Friday and they talked about sport, or, you know, because at lunchtimes they all had their little groups and they didn't really feel welcome, and they ended up in a little group of newbies on their own. It wasn't a really bad place. It just wasn't, you know, the right place for them, because they hadn't done anything to think about the culture and all those incremental daily changes. Because ultimately, culture isn't about, you know, the big things you do, bringing in lots of people from different backgrounds. It's about the tiny little habits, the tiny behaviors on a day-to-day basis that make a difference and build a culture. So just be wary of thinking about just the categories of people you've got. Yes, it's important to pay attention to your recruitment pipeline and how you're getting people into the business and who you're getting into the business. But you have to be so aware. It's even more important to think about what the business looks like that you're bringing them into. So, work to improve issues of bias and prejudice for all outgroups, rather than focusing only on one group of people at the expense of others. So the other issue we see here a lot is that I will start talking to an organization and they'll say, we've made really good progress. Say, okay, tell me all about it. So we started with gender. And I have to say it's almost always started with gender. Occasionally it's sexuality, but it's almost always we started with gender. Okay, why did you do that? Okay, because, you know, they're 50% of the wider population, and there's lots of data out there on gender, and, you know, gender pay gap. Okay, great. So what have you been working on? So programs to fix the women, excellent. And we've been looking at all our HR policies. Okay, great. You realize in 6 months to a year's time, you're going to have to look at all of those policies again because you didn't think about maybe disabled people. Okay, we don't have any disabled people. Do you not want any? Great. So the other issue here is it's really alienating. So whether or not you don't have anybody else in the business yet and you want to recruit them, well, those people are going to come into interviews and ask you. Or just for the people who are already there, you see somebody talking loads about diversity and inclusion. You get invited to diversity and inclusion events, and all you hear over and over and over again is gender. It's not for me. And not only is it not for me, they're talking about something that should be for me, and I've been excluded again. So just be really mindful when you are looking at diversity and inclusion issues that you don't just focus on gender from the start, yeah? Yeah. Yeah. To me, it also feels like it smacks of a tick box exercise. Like gender's the most prominent thing, so let's go there. That's the, you know, there's the most stuff there. Yeah. Okay. So again, I could probably talk for days on this one, and I'm not going to bore you all too much. But data and evidence. And actually, Evelyn touched on it a little bit earlier with confirmation bias. So I've been doing a big piece of research over the last 8 months, and I won't go into all the detail of the research, but I've been talking to individuals in businesses who are trying to act as allies or advocates. So they have a day job, and on top of their day job, they are doing work around diversity and inclusion. And I asked them all the same sorts of sets of questions. And I have to say, this goes much bigger than just this piece of research. And then I'll get to a piece where I'll say, okay, tell me about the sources of information. Tell me about how you know what to do differently in your business. Well, I just looked at what so-and-so was doing down the street, or I did it in my old organization. I say, okay, do you read much? Yeah, occasionally I'll read an HBR article. Okay, or occasionally I'll look at a TED talk. But you know, you just know what to do here, don't you? Do you? Because my experience is that if we all knew what to do here, we'd probably be doing it. And their intentions are brilliant, but the concern here is that there is actually quite a large amount of evidence and research out there, and it's pretty easy to access. And it will tell you in no uncertain terms how to do these things differently. And my concern is that by ignoring all of that, we are just going with our confirmation bias. We are going what we already believe to be true. And that causes all sorts of problems in itself. And as I said, I can talk about this for days and days. And I'm not saying you have to go and pull all the scientific articles out there and read them all, but just spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of research before you start doing something, whether it's really small in your team and you're just trying to do something a little bit different close to home, or it's organization-wide. Make sure you're doing some research and think about the assumptions you hold and the assumptions people around you hold. It's really common to hear something along the lines of just, well, we already know that's true, so we can move on. Do you know it's true? Or is it just accepted wisdom? Okay, so how do you know it's true? How are you going to test that that's true? So there's a little bit of a cheat. I don't know if everyone's going to agree with me on this. If you are interested in the scientific papers, if you go into Google Scholar and look at the citations, if it's got higher citations, it's a good chance that it's relatively valid, okay? As a starting point in like...
The only other, I love that cheat. The only other thing that I would add is that replicability, right, when there are findings that have been demonstrated from multiple different researchers at various institutions is another gold standard for research, right? So that can either be like there's like 100 papers all pointing to the same conclusion, or in one study or in one paper there's like 10 studies that all point to the same conclusion, which those papers do exist, right? That's another way to keep that in mind.
Yeah, if you want to look at the original research, so good place to start. But also do testing. So when we're talking about data and evidence, we're not just talking about what exists already, we're talking about creating your own. So if you want to try something out, you've read something, you've heard something, you've been chatting to someone, and you've got something, an idea that might work, find a small engaged population. It might be your own team if you're not in HR or management, and just see if you can test it there. See what happens. Question your assumptions at the beginning. Make sure you are putting in place something to measure, and then test it and see if it works. And if it does, well, try it again, iterate, and test it out again, go a little bit bigger. And what you end up with, if you do that, and you can do this quite quickly, I have to say, you can do this within a few weeks if it's something really small, is that then you end up with a business case to go further up the chain. And it doesn't cost very much money to do it with a small population. It doesn't take huge amounts of time or resource. And if it doesn't work, well, it's not so high profile that everybody's seen it and then it hasn't gone very well. So think about what you can do locally as well. And the other thing I see a lot, and I still find so amazing, is even in enormous organizations, the only data they're capturing on people is their name and gender. And actually, the name doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they are in terms of their name. What matters is when you're looking at a group of people, whether you've got 20 people, 20,000 people, is that you know who you're dealing with, who the people are that you have in your organization, and how you can make sure that you are catering to them. And I do find it amazing that so many organizations don't capture this data at all. And it isn't that hard to get it. And I don't mean, going off and stalking them online or anything completely unethical like that. And we are, one of the biggest things for us is anonymity and confidentiality and protecting people's data. But I'm going to use an example here and hope that I don't get told off by the Sharinas. So within a very short period of time, we ran a survey here. And within a very short period of time, we knew a huge amount about what it's like to work here and what types of people you have here. Is that fair? Within the space of 3 or 4 weeks? And I mean huge amounts of data. And the survey that we asked them to complete, on average, I think took people 4.5 minutes to complete. So we're not talking about, you've got to ask people to spend hours doing something. And it was completely anonymous, so no names, nothing like that. And when we presented that data to the organization, we made sure we cut the data in a way that we could see as the researchers what was going on, but we presented nothing back to the organization that would be identifiable as an individual. So you can get a lot of data and understand who you've got really quickly, even if it doesn't exist already. But I would say for those of you in the kind of more HR space who do want to do something like that, just be really careful about the questions you're asking and the messaging you put around that. And I won't go to that loads, but if anyone wants to talk about it, because I know not everyone is HR, happy to have a conversation about that. So seek out data and evidence from different sources. Look at opposing views, but make sure that you're thinking about not the symptoms. You're actually thinking about what the root causes are of the problem that you're looking at. And finally, I've talked about so many things, and Evelyn talked about so many things, but don't try to fix it all at once. Again, whether it is just you on your own trying to do something differently, pick a habit, and I'm going to talk about habits in a minute and the things you can actually do. Pick one habit that you want to practice for the next couple of weeks and just do that. If you are in a team, pick something small and try it out. If you're in an organization, pick one part. Ideally, look at the whole process, look at the experience people are going through. Pick the biggest pain points, the things that are really causing you problems or causing people problems, and just see if you can do something differently with that. Don't go for everything at once, because you will fail. So break the problems down that you can see into smaller pieces and tackle them one by one, because in the long run, you're going to get there faster than if you try and do one giant thing and it all falls flat. So, in synopsis, recognize and use your power and privilege. Fix in-groups, not out-groups. Address the system, not just the categories of people. Use data and evidence and tackle one thing at a time. So, I'm going to get my trusty assistant, Ben, to hand out some cards to you. Can I go? Oh, you're the trusty assistant. No, Ben's. Oh no, he's. I don't. Turns out I don't have trusty assistants. So, very briefly, we're handing out some cards to you all. So taking a lot of the research that exists, including Evelyn's research, we created what we call our ally honeycomb. So under each of these 6 cells sits between 4 and 6 habits or behaviors, and we're handing out 2 cards, so there'll be 1 of each. And we're handing out challenging bias, communication, and harnessing privilege, which is sort of what we've been talking about today. So there you go. So some people were asking Evelyn questions at the end of her talk. So some of these relate to that. Actually, Evelyn can probably talk about it better than I can because it's her research. So these habits, the idea with these is that we've done the hard work of breaking down the big, difficult thing for you into small, actionable, observable pieces. So the idea is that, I'm going to hand over to Ben in a minute because he's going to take you through some action planning to actually pick something to go back to your day-to-day lives or your workplaces to do differently. So, for example, going back to what Evelyn was talking about, do you ask people to explain what they mean when they voice comments, jokes, or language that can be considered biased or disrespectful? So this is the asking questions that we were talking about. So when you hear something, do you call them out by just asking them about it and what they mean? So you'll be able to read through all of those. There's a second one too about the harnessing power and privilege that we've just talked about. So again, same thing, the idea being that you can pick one and do something differently. But I am going to hand over to Ben so that he can talk you through that in a second. But first, does anybody have any questions? We will be around afterwards as well. Yeah. So which bit?
So say for example, when the example could be that they were talking only about gender, and then you said to them, you might have to change it, and they'll be like, why?
So we are fortunate enough to most of the time when we get taken into an organisation or asked in, they are already some way down the path most of the time. So we can have that conversation a little bit more openly. That said, we've all definitely been in situations where we've had to call this stuff out with people in organisations. And it is a strict policy for us that we will do that. And actually we will turn down work if organisations will not, are only interested in doing a tick box exercise. If what they want to do isn't going to work and we know it's not going to work, we won't work with them. And I have to say, that's sometimes quite a difficult conversation, and they do look at you like you're insane because it's different to their experience, and that's okay, because there's different, it's a spectrum, isn't it? You've got your people that want it who are just hard, you know, over in the, I should say that way, right hand, that way. Like they're so far, they're so far down that at this point, there is no point me having that conversation to discriminate. But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on an individual basis, if I'm having that conversation, we'll say something, but we won't work with somebody who's, you know, I just mean it's a spectrum of stuff. And some people are far down that end, and some people are way down the ally, and they are, you know, so we tend to target on the majority, like the middle.